Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test Tech. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be building the FT Triplane XL. Now this plane is a larger version of our original Mighty Mini triplane, but it has some amazing new features like aileron control, flat bottom wing surface, and of course, it's a lot bigger. We've also added on some really cool options like the ability to have pan tilt FPV first person view right from the cockpit. Now if you're building along with us, you can either use the downloadable plans that will be released in the very near future, or you can use a speed build kit. One thing to keep in mind that this plane specifically calls for our FT XL power pack with the 9-gram servos. This is really important because if you go to different aftermarket power packs, you're not going to get the thrust or balance required to give this plane great performance. So if you already have your power pack, your speed build kit, or your plans cut out and you're ready to build along with me, let's get our materials in order and we'll get started. So in this portion of the video, we're going to be showing you how to build all 3 of our wings for the FT Triplane XL. Now the really cool thing about this is basically all 3 of these wings build the exact same. Now even though all 3 of these wings build the exact same, the bottom plates are going to be slightly different to allow things like the servos, or for servo wiring, or for proper fit. For that reason, the bottom plate of the top one will be labeled top, and the bottom plate of the middle wing will be labeled mid. Make sure that when you're building these wings that you find and locate those parts and put them aside. And for these wings, we're going to build our spar, we're going to join our 2 wing halves together, then we're going to go ahead and tape on our bottom plate of the wing, do our bevel cuts, and finally assemble. Let's go ahead and pop out the pieces for the top wing, we'll identify them, and we'll get started. Feel free to pause your video at this moment and make sure that your pieces look exactly like mine. One thing to take careful note is the top wing is actually going to have the aileron cutouts for them. And it's also going to have this protrusion that you see for the aileron counterbalances. We're also going to have the lower surface of our top wing, and we're going to have our main spar. The first thing we're going to do is assemble our main spar so we can put these 2 pieces aside. To prep our main spar, we're going to take a knife with the very tip of it blunted so we don't cut through the facing paper on the other side, and we're going to carefully score down our score cuts all the way through. Now with our plans that are going to be released in the future, you're going to notice that red is score cut, black is cut through, and blue is etch or marking. If you cut through the facing paper, don't worry, it's very easy to repair that with tape. Simply by folding over our edge 180 degrees and using our fingernails, we can roll the piece of foam that we have right out and create the cavity we need for our A-fold. If this piece comes out in pieces, you can either do your score cut a little deeper or use the edge of your razor blade to clean it out. Same process on the other side. You're going to notice that our new maker foam has a lot better bond between the facing paper and the foam, so sometimes it likes to stick a little bit better than it used to. Now you're going to notice an edge line that's going to indicate an A-fold. An A-fold is where the side plate is above the bottom plate. The proper way to do an A-fold is to leave your side plate firmly against the table and rotate the bottom plate up 90 degrees. We're going to go ahead and do that practice fold right now. And you want to make sure there's no resistance whatsoever as you carry it up to 90 degrees. If you feel any resistance, take a barbecue skewer or your razor blade and clean out that channel a little bit more. Now that we're happy with the fit, we're going to take our glue gun. We're using the FT300 glue gun. The nice thing about this is it has a temperature select guide. I like to have my temperature at medium or just below. It gives me plenty of working time even on bigger airplanes, but it's not so boiling hot that it takes forever to dry. It also doesn't bubble the glue. I'm going to focus my nozzle about a ½ inch in from the edge, and I'm going to place most of the glue on the very bottom of the side plate. As I go through, I'm also going to end my glue about a ½ inch from the edge. This keeps the glue from squirting out. Now I can carry this up 90 degrees, and I'm going to hold it there for about 35 to 45 seconds. Make sure your glue is fully cooled before going on to the next step. Once the one side is dry, we always are going to do a test fit to make sure everything goes up 90 degrees. And once we're happy with it, we can come back with our glue. And again, I'm starting and stopping about a ½ inch from the edge. Now all of these spars are going to be assembled the exact same way. If you'd like to do all 3 sets of your spars, feel free to do so now because they are interchangeable. Now that we have our spar done, we can go ahead and put that aside, and we're going to move on to our next step, which is going to be joining the 2 wing halves. We're going to take the 2 pieces of our wing, and with the score cuts facing down, we're going to slide them together just like you see here. I always like to take the undercut from the laser and kind of shingle the pieces over each other just a little bit. You don't have to worry because this is actually counted for in the design, so that little bit that you squeezed in isn't going to hurt you. Once we have this moved together, we're going to take our 2-inch tape and we're going to tape the center seam. I always like to favor one side and then carefully lift up, shingle it over, and then roll it over to the other side. I'm going to cut off the front, but I'm going to leave the back just a little bit long because I'm going to fold that over in just a minute. Now that we have our wing tape together, you're going to notice that all of our etch and score lines are lining up with each other. My next step here is to fill this cavity, again starting and stopping about a 1/2 inch from the edge. I'm also going to skip over our score cuts. I'm going to take it right up to the edge. This is where it's really handy to have a small piece of scrap foam so we can wipe off any excess. It's also going to build a stronger glue joint. So take a piece from our kit there. I'll lay this right down. I'm going to wipe off all the excess. Now I can take this one piece that I have on the very back and fold it over. We're going to let this fully cool for at least a minute, so when we pick it up, it doesn't move. While we're letting this dry, I can take my barbecue skewer that's included in my kit, and I can go ahead and remove the foam from the cavities you see for our wing struts. I'm just going to go ahead and poke that down, and with a little bit of a rolling motion, you're going to see that those pieces pop right out. You can now see that I can hold up my wing and it's not drooping. The glue is fully cured and it's dry. Our next step here is to take our bottom plate and join it to the top plate. Now you're going to notice here that this not only says top, but there's an arrow pointing forward. This arrow is really important because depending on where your notches or the different cutouts are, if you put it on backwards, it's not going to line up properly. The arrow is going to point towards the leading edge, and it's also going to be on the inside of the wing. So what I like to do is look at the leading edge, point the arrow towards it, and then line it up. You're going to notice that there's a little tiny tab right here in the middle, and you can put that directly over the center seam. And I like to shingle this just like I did the other one. There we go. So a neat little trick that you can do is you can take a little piece of tape, and once you have it lined up the way you want, I like to take a little piece of tape on the very edges and tape it down. This is going to hold it in place, and when you go over with a second piece of tape, it's only going to make it stronger. Now that we have this attacked in place, I'm going to take one long piece of tape here, and we're going to tape the leading edge. And what I like to do is just cut a small relief here and then carefully pull it away. Small relief, carefully pull it away. Now that we have our leading edge taped, let's go ahead and cut our double bevel right down the middle here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this over 180 degrees. I'm using my FT knife here, and one of the really cool features about that is we can actually cant it in one notch. This gives us the perfect angle to cut beautiful bevel cuts. If you're looking for your hot glue gun or a hobby knife or basically all the materials you need to build our kits, we have something really cool called a crafty kit that gives you everything you need, including things like your servo centering tools, battery voltage alarms, and so much more. You can check that out on our store or in the link below. What I like to do with our Flite test knife here is now I can ride the back end here and it positions it perfectly in our hand to be able to cut a perfect bevel cut. I'm gonna go ahead and do this towards the camera, but it's a lot easier to do this at the edge of the table. And you can always practice this with some scrap foam. I'm simply gonna let the back edge of the knife rest against it. I'm gonna pull it along. You never want your knife to be perpendicular to the foam. You always want it at a little bit over a 45-degree angle. If you accidentally cut through the center where the facing paper is or your tape, you can always repair that with a little bit more tape. Let's go ahead and do the other side now. And if your bevel cut doesn't look perfect, you don't have to worry because this is all going to be on the inside of your wing. And I'm just going to put a little notch there. We don't need to go to the wingtip. If you do by accident, it's not going to hurt a thing. A good way to tell if you have your bevel cut enough is you should be easily able to take it up 90 degrees without any resistance. Also, make sure you don't cut through your tape so the wing doesn't pop apart on you. Now that we have our bevel cut established, let's go ahead and glue in our top spar. The flat portion of the top spar is going to go against the top of the wing, just like you see here. Make sure that you line up the center section so it goes in between the two notches, here and here. The area that you want to match it to is between the two score lines that you see on your wing. Once you're happy with that, we'll apply a bead of glue right down the middle. Flip it over and set it in place. We're going to let this fully cool, and then we can move on to our next step. Now for our next step, we're going to be establishing the airfoil for our wing. Now this is really important that we get a nice consistent airfoil on the top, middle, and bottom wings. For that reason, the back of this top plate here is going to go right up against the edge of the table because when we fold the wing over, the trailing edge of the wing is actually going to droop down lower than the wing itself. This is going to kind of make the plane think it has flaps on all the time and give it that awesome slow characteristic that we love so much about it. The first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we can easily bend up on the score lines. So I'm just going to gently bring that up. And now we're going to go ahead and do a test fold and bring this over. I have the trailing edge of the bottom of the wing right around here. And now when I fold it over, I can get my airfoil. Now it's really important to practice this and make sure that the whole wing from tip to tip has the same amount of bend in it. You don't want to push it right in the center and have the outside of the wings not bending the same way. So make sure that when you bend this over, that you observe the whole wing to make sure it's consistent. Now that we have that airfoil bent and we practice it, let's go ahead and lock it in with a bead of glue over each score cut. I'm just simply going to go ahead and put the tip of my nozzle right down in, and you can see that I'm pumping a heavy bead of glue right down in there and letting it fill that cavity up all the way to the tip, and again on the next side. You can do this one at a time if you have a smaller glue gun that can't handle the amount of glue. All right, now that we put this down, we're going to bend this over, and we're going to make sure everything lines up, and then we're going to hold it down and let it fully dry. As the glue cools, this is going to fully lock in our wing airfoil, and this is going to be the exact same process we're going to do for all three wings. Now that we have our airfoil, you can see that that's locked in beautifully. A really good way to test and make sure it's consistent is the middle, trailing, and leading sections should all be flat up against the table when you rotate them that way. And that's a really good technique you can use for all of your builds with any of our speed build kits. Now I'm going to make sure I have a hot glue stick handy because I'm definitely going to be using a lot of hot glue. And I'm going to go ahead and glue my wing halves together. I'm first going to start with a bead down the leading edge. Go ahead and put my next bead in there. We're using our Flite Test hot glue. It has a lot more binders in it. And although it's milky white, that's because of the different kind of binders and hardeners in it. This handles a lot more higher temperatures. All right, one more. We're going to go right on the trailing edge. If you don't have enough temperature to be able to do this step, you can always come back after your wing halves are glued together, put your nozzle in between the surfaces, and push it down. Now we're gonna go ahead and fold this over, same process as before. And what I like to do is kind of lean my hands nice and flat. I don't wanna push with my fingertips. I wanna let everything be wide open and flat with pressure down on my trailing edge. Now we should feel that our spar area here is flat up against the table and parallel to the table. If it's at an angle, make sure you press down on this to get a good solid fit. I'm not putting any major pressure on this. You shouldn't have to force it, and if you're wrinkling the foam, you're pushing too hard. Just simply let the weight of your arms rest on this and let it hold down where it needs to be. Now, after about a minute of holding this down, we should be able to release pressure and it shouldn't open up on us. A really good indicator too that we have even pressure is that the trailing edge of the bottom of our wing is firmly against the top surface. If you see it opened a little bit, you can always put a little bit of glue in there and push it back down. Now for our other two wings, at this point it'd be finished, but with our top wing, we have ailerons cut into it. We're gonna go ahead and prepare our ailerons now, so that way when it comes time to putting our servos together, mounting the top wing, that's one less step that we have to do. To prepare our ailerons, I'm gonna go ahead and go to the score cut that is facing on the inner part of the wing, and I'm gonna cut my aileron free. Now with a little bend, I should be able to fold this over 180 degrees. I'm gonna kind of situate it comfortably in my hand. Detent my hobby knife here. And I'm going to cut a 45-degree angle right into my aileron. And again, if you accidentally cut through the center facing paper, you can always repair that with a piece of tape. If you're like me and you don't like that noise that you hear, an easy way to take care of that is just take the back part of your blade or a push rod and push it right down through there. Now that we have our aileron cut out, we're going to reinforce that facing paper and the foam where it comes together in the hinge with a bead of glue, and we're going to wipe it off with a piece of scrap foam. All we simply need to do is put a thin ribbon of glue on there. We're going to take our scrap piece of foam, and we're going to wipe off all the excess and push the residual glue right into the foam and the facing paper. One more time. And we're going to give this about 30 seconds. And we're going to give this about 30 seconds to cool. We're going to do the same process on the other side now. Cut our 45-degree bevel. I'm just going to get my hobby knife started here. Little sawing motion kind of helps with that. There we go. That's good. We'll take care of that little rubbing that we have going on. Perfect. And let me just chop off a piece of this. And we'll reinforce with a bead of hot glue. Again, I'm putting the tip of that glue gun right on the facing paper in the center and the foam. And then I'm coming back and scraping it all off. Now our top wing is now done. We're going to do the exact same process on our middle wing. So make sure you locate the bottom plate called mid, and also the top plate that is going to look just like this one, but it's not going to have the counterbalances. It's going to be a little bit more narrower. Always make sure that your left and right wing match each other so you're not assembling the wrong wings together. Now that we have our top wing done, we're going to move on to the middle wing. These are the pieces that we're going to need for our middle wing. Notice that we have our center spar. I've already weeded out the different cavities that we need so we can fold it together. We have our bottom plate that's labeled mid, and I've already popped out the pieces I need. And we have our two top wing halves. Feel free to pause the video, make sure your pieces look exactly like they see here, and we'll go ahead and start just like we did on the top wing with assembling our spar. We always like to do a test fold every time before we do any kind of gluing, just to make sure we have everything cleared out properly. And now I can again focus the glue right on the side of the bottom plate for our A-fold, starting and stopping about a ½ inch from the edge. We'll bring it up to 90 and let the glue cool. Same process on the other side. Bead right on the bottom. Up 90 and let it cool. With our spar all assembled, we'll join our two wing halves. Again, we'll just go ahead and flip the score cuts down, let it face the bottom, and we'll tape the two halves together. I'd like to just tape one half, kind of bring it up, shingle it over. There we go. I'm going to cut off the leading edge and leave the trailing edge long. Now I can fold my wing open and put a nice healthy bead of glue right down the center. I'm going to skip over my score cuts and start and stop a 1/2 inch from the edge. Using a scrap piece of foam, we'll wipe off any extra glue. This is going to not only clean up our wing, but also make it stronger. And then finally, I'm going to take the trailing edge of the tape and fold it over. Let the two wing halves fully cure together before we move it. Give it at least a minute to a minute and a half. Now that our top wing halves are glued together, we're going to go ahead and join the bottom half. Make sure that your markings are pointing down and also that the arrow is pointing towards the leading edge of the wing. I'm going to use 2 pieces of tape to lock the top and the bottom plate together. This makes it easier for me to put a seam of tape right along the leading edge. Also, it's a good time to make sure that when we fold this over, that the bottom plate is right in between the 2 slots for our wing struts. Once we're happy with the fit, we can tape our leading edge together. Now would be a great time to cut our double bevels. I'm going to go ahead and detent my knife here, just to get myself a better angle. And cut a 45-degree bevel on the top and the bottom plate. For the top wing surface, I'm going to start and stop right in alignment with the bottom wing surface. No reason to go from the wingtip to wingtip. A good indication that your double bevel is good is that you can easily bring it up at least 90 degrees before you feel any resistance. Now we can go ahead and glue our top spar in place. We're simply going to line it up between our strut notches, just like you see here. After we're happy with the test fit, all we need is a bead of glue on the very bottom, and we're going to line it in place between the 2 score cuts. I like to kind of work it back and forth a little bit. Once we're happy with the fit, hold it in place until the glue fully cools. Now that we have our spar in place, we're going to flip this around. I'm going to gently allow the wing to bend on its score cuts here to give it its airfoil. And once I've bent this around enough, I should be able to bring it fully down to the bottom. I'm going to move the bottom plate of my wing to the edge of the work table because the rear trailing edge of the wing is actually going to go lower than the bottom surface. Now that we're happy with the way everything bends, I'll make sure I have plenty of hot glue at my hands. I'm going to press a bead of glue right down into the score cut, right along the spar, and again right into the score cut on both sides. Let's do a little bit more right there. And again, we're going to fold this over just like we practiced. I'm going to line up the trailing edge with the trailing edge. It's right at the edge of the table. And I'm really focusing to make sure that the area of the spar is parallel with the table. The trailing edge is down flat against the bottom foam, in that the outer portions of the wing which have the undercambered are not peeled up or not flatter than the center section. Notice I'm not pushing with my fingertips and denting the foam. It's just a nice gentle pressure. Now that we have our airfoil locked in, we can move on and we can glue our wing halves together. Make sure you have plenty of hot glue available to you. We're going to start on the leading edge. Again, I like to start and stop about a ½ inch from the edge. Bead glue right down the spars. Then finally, one on the trailing edge. You can choose to do the trailing edge in a separate step if your hot glue can't deliver enough heat. Now we're going to go right down to the bottom. And you can spread your arms around, you can do whatever you want. Just apply nice even pressure. And again, we're making sure our trailing edge is right on the back of the table here, so our two rear aileron areas can actually go down lower than the wing itself. Won't be very much, just a touch. I like to give this about a minute to a minute and a half to fully cool before moving on to the next step. A minute and a half has passed. You're going to see when I flip this over, the trailing edge is firmly against the top plate, and that the middle section is flat against the table when I push it, and the leading edge is flat against the table when I press it. Everything is flat, nothing is warped. Our middle wing's now done. Let's go ahead and do the exact same process we just did on our lower wing, and we are done building the wings. And we're going to follow the exact same process as we've done on the previous two wings with the bottom wing. You're going to notice that the bottom wing is the shortest of all three wings. Also, it has a 90-degree notch cut in each side. The bottom plate's going to have no defining marks, but you will see a little tiny notch right where the center of the leading edge is. And then finally, we have our main spar that's already been weeded and ready for its A-fold. Let's go ahead and build our spar and assemble our wings. By now, this should be very comfortable for you. We do our test folds, we apply our glue, and we glue our spar together. Now with our spar fully assembled, we can put our attention towards our wings. Just like before, we're going to tape our two wing halves together, making sure we take our time and line them up perfectly. Once we have our pieces aligned and taped, we can come back with a bead of glue right down the center, hopping over our score cuts, and starting and stopping a ½ inch from the edge. All we need is a scrap piece of foam to wipe off any residual, and we'll fold over the back piece of tape for a little bit more strength and a finished look. Let this fully dry before we move on to the next step. All right, now that our two wing halves are together, I'm going to line this up right in the middle with the notch mark. We're going to center up our wing. We're going to tape down our two corners of the leading edge. And once we're happy with our alignment, one single piece of tape is all we need to secure the leading edge of the top and the bottom plate. Now let's do our double bevels on the leading edge. Good way to make sure that you have your double bevel deep enough is that you can easily move it up 90 degrees. Now we're going to line up our spar right in between the notches and between our two strut cutouts. Once we're happy with the look and the fit, we'll place a bead of glue right down the middle of the spar, flip it over, and line it up between the score cut and the notches. Little wiggle back and forth kind of spreads the glue out nice. And then I'm just going to take my time and make sure it's in between the score cuts perfectly. Once our spar is dried in place, we can now carefully bend the wing along the score cuts, giving it its classic airfoil shape. We're going to flip it around, bring the trailing edge to the table, and then slowly bring it over all the way down to the bottom. Make sure that the center section where the spar is parallel with the table, and that the trailing edge can easily press down to the bottom without the outer tips of the wing warping up. Always check to make sure you have plenty of hot glue, and we're going to apply a bead of glue right down into our score cuts and along the spars to lock in our airfoil shape. Again, we're using the FT300 glue gun, and we're using our special blended glue that has a lot more binders and olefins in it. It's a harder glue that resists heat better. Not as rubbery, more plastic. Bring this over to the table, and again, I'm spreading my hands out just to make sure that I'm fully pressing down on the spar, not with too much pressure, and allowing the trailing edge to meet the bottom plate of the wing and the rear aileron areas to be able to go down lower than the wing itself, just a touch. All right. We'll check the airfoil and make sure it's good on the front, rear, and trailing edge. And now we can make sure we have plenty of hot glue. We'll place a bead of glue right along the leading edge. The main spars. And then finally, the very back of the trailing edge of the top plate. Now we can fold our wing over just the same way as we were doing when we got our airfoil. We're going to press the spars down first and our trailing edge second. This wing's a lot smaller, so it's a lot easier to kind of hold everything in place. But again, I just kind of like to wander over the wing, really focusing on that trailing edge and that spar area. We're going to give this about a minute to a minute and a half to fully cool, and then our wings are now done. And just like our other two wings here, we're going to check to make sure that we have no real warps in our trailing edge, our midsection, or the top of the leading edge. And we're also going to confirm that the trailing edge meets the top of the bottom plate, just like you see here. So the really cool thing about flight tests and foam board airplanes is you can build incredibly fast. We just built 3 wings in most likely under an hour. Our next step is to move on and start assembling our fuselage. Now in this portion of the video, we're going to be showing you how to assemble a fuselage of our FT Triplane XL. First thing we're going to do is we're going to pop out all the pieces and we're going to identify them. Feel free to pause your video to make sure your pieces look exactly like what you see here. Also, this is a great time to weed out the pieces that you're not going to need. So here we have our main pieces of the fuselage. We have our main fuselage, the front nose piece that's going to be attached, our 2 nose doublers, our lower rear portion of our fuselage, and also our front lower portion of our fuselage. You're going to notice I've already removed a lot of the foam in different areas. Feel free to do that as well. You may notice that there's this one piece that I have not removed yet. Leaving this piece in gives you the ability to have a pan-tilt FPV experience where you can fly from the cockpit. Our next step here, now that we've identified all the pieces, is we're going to weed the foam away from the areas that we need. This is done the exact same way as other components like our spars. All we need to do is drag our knife about 3/4 of the way through our score cuts and then peel the paper away. It's always a good idea to score cut your pieces. Even though the laser cut takes it very deep, the last little bit that you have here will give you a nice clean release of the paper. You may notice that our foam sticks a lot more to the facing paper. This is because our new blend of foam is stronger and has a better bond, but it will still peel easily for you. You just got to take your time with it. Now that we have everything cleared out, let's go ahead and go piece by piece, describe the areas that we carved out and our next steps. You can see our main body here. We have the cavities right along where our B-fold's gonna be, and also the same as our nose. You're also gonna notice that we have a relief cavity right here where we're gonna overlap this for our front nose. Our front doublers have what we call a C-fold. A C-fold is basically where the foam folds 180 degrees on itself, so the cavity is gonna be twice as wide as the foam. We have the lower bottom of our fuselage, and we have the outer areas trimmed out. And again, we have the lower front portion of our fuselage with the side areas weeded out and also the facing paper removed on the inside. Feel free to pause your video and make sure everything looks just like what you see here. You may also notice here that I've removed the little tabs in the center section for where an FPV pod is going to go. I'm going to go ahead and put a few of these pieces aside for now, and we're going to put our attention on joining our two fuselage halves together. First thing we're going to do is we're going to flip this over 180 degrees. We're going to line up the piece, allowing that paper that we weeded out to shingle over the front of the nose. Once we're happy with the fit, we're going to tape these two pieces together. I always like to put it on one side and then kind of hold it over, line it up. Tack down that side, and tack down that side. Nice thing about our foam board is it has the ability for you to be able to release and reapply your tape without damaging it. It's gonna get a little bit smoother. This is all gonna be covered up by our cowling. There we go. Now you can see when I flip it over, my cavities line up and my edge lines might line up. I'm gonna go ahead and take my razor blade. I'm gonna remove the extra tape that we have. If you build any previous models with us, this should be very familiar because it's a very common technique with all of our larger models. Now that we have this piece taped together, we can open it up like a door. And I'm going to focus the majority of the glue on the very back, and I'm going to skip over the cavities. I always like to start and stop about a ½ inch from the edge just to keep it from squirting too far. Now I can lay it flat on the table, press down firmly, and if you have a little bit of residual glue come up, don't worry, you can always use a scrap piece of foam and wipe off the excess. I always like to give this nice flat pressure using the table as our friend because that's going to hold the glue down nice and smooth. Don't worry if this piece doesn't look the best because again, the cowling's going to go over it. Now that we have our nose glued in place, I'm going to go ahead and push this forward and I'm going to do my 2 C-folds on my front doublers. C-folds are very easy. We're just going to practice it. We're just going to fold it over. And the important thing with the C-fold is to make sure that the edges of your foam on all sides, including the facing paper, line up. Once you're happy with the fit, we're going to make sure we have plenty of glue in our hot glue gun. And I'm just going to chase the perimeter about a ½ inch in. And I can even put a very, very thin ribbon right on the facing paper. Now I'm going to wiggle it back and forth, press down evenly, and then we're going to let it dry. Going to do the exact same process on the other side. We always give a test fit just to make sure we're happy. That looks great. I'm going to get another hot glue stick ready. And we're going to trace out the perimeter a ½ inch in. Thin ribbon of glue right on the facing paper and fold it over. Now that we have our doublers done, we're going to go ahead and test fit them. And there's no exact angle for left and right. These are both the same. But you're going to notice some edge lines here, and these should line up perfectly right over our edge lines, just as you see. The one thing you want to take careful consideration with is the very top here. You should see that edge line being roughly the width of one piece of foam. That's important because when we do our B-fold, we don't want this to block our B-fold. So make sure that you have this exactly along the edge line here and along the perimeter of the other lines around the fuselage. Now that we're happy with it, I'm going to hold that glue stick because I'm definitely going to need it. I'm going to go ahead and put my glue ½ inch in from the perimeter just like we did on our doublers. Put another glue stick in. And now I can lay this right on top I'm gonna wiggle it around just a little bit. Gonna look right over the top here, make sure I'm on my edge lines all the way around, and I am. I'm gonna hold it in place. Once the glue is cooled, we'll do the other side. Same process on the other side. We always practice our fit first. Looks great. Now we're gonna just take this up. We know exactly the side we need to glue. Now that we have both our doublers in place, we're gonna put our attention towards the rear of the fuselage. You're gonna see an etch line here, and on our plans it's gonna be marked in blue. This etch line here is very important because we wanna be able to make our bend of the fuselage right on this line. Also, if you're painting this later, this line makes a really great reference point for the area that you wanna mask off to be able to do that iconic triplane scheme where basically everything forward of this, the wings, the canopy, everything is basically painted and the back is left white. To prepare this piece, all we simply need to do is we're gonna lift this up, and I wanna see it naturally kind of find its angle at the angle that we're gonna have on the top portion of the fuselage. Gonna do the same part on the other side. You notice I'm holding down the front section as I lift up the rear. If you're scratch building this would be a good idea to basically put a little bit of a crease with your fingernail or a ballpoint pen or a barbecue skewer to be able to establish this crease. Now we're gonna go ahead and do a practice B-fold. A B-fold is basically where the side plate is beside the bottom plate. So to do that, we're gonna leave the bottom plate firmly against the table. We're gonna rotate the side plate up 90 degrees, and it should meet exactly at 90 degrees and fit flat against the table. If it doesn't, make sure your cavities are cleared out because it's really important that you get a firm seat against the table and a good 90-degree angle. Now on our crafty kit, we have triangle squares that you can use to get exact angles, and I would highly recommend you doing that so you don't have the bottom of your fuselage being narrower or wider than the top. Now before we fold up these sides here, we're gonna go ahead and fold up our center former right here in the middle. This is gonna be really helpful because now we can bring our sides up to it, but I would still strongly recommend having a triangle with you because you can crush this in or leave this out a little bit wider. This is what we affectionately call an A-fold. An A-fold is gonna go above the bottom plate, so all we simply need to do in this case is just bring it up, and I'll use the triangle square to hold it in place until it's dry. Again, the A-folds is where the fold is above the bottom plate. Typically, we'd be rotating the whole fuselage, but where this is located, you simply can't do it. So I'm just gonna lift it up, pull it over, and use the triangle square to hold it into place. Now that we have the center former folded up, we're gonna do one final test fold. You're gonna see when I hold this in place, I should have a perfect 90-degree angle. We're gonna make sure we have plenty of glue in our hot glue gun. I'm gonna favor my glue on the bottom of the former and also on the side of the bottom plate. Then I'll come right back here, focus on the side of the bottom plate. And finally, right up the side of the former. Now we can fold this over 90 degrees. Notice I'm pushing down nice and firm against the table. And I can come back here with my triangle square, make sure that I'm not getting anything out of square. The downward pressure of the side plate against the table is what's going to give you that nice crisp 90-degree edge. We're going to let the glue fully cool, and then we're going to do the other side. And just like before, we always practice our folds, make sure everything meets up nicely. Beautiful. Plenty of glue in the hot glue gun. We're going to favor our glue on the top of the former, on the side of our top plate, on the side of our vertical former. Whoop, a little sloppy, that's okay. And on the side top of the fuselage. I can bring it up 90 degrees. Again, I'm folding it, making sure everything sits down in its place. Press these two together, down against the table. So I can bring my triangle and make sure we're 90 degrees. very easy on the back side of your fuselage to kind of let it rise up a little bit. Just always make sure that you're checking the whole seam that you're folded on, not just focusing on one part. All right, our fuselage on the top part's now done. Let's go ahead and put the rear bottom plate on. So here we have the bottom plate of our fuselage. We're going to do a quick test fit here, and we're simply going to slide it into place. And we should see it basically meet the very back and the very front of the fuselage. Once we glue this in place, we're going to quickly rotate this over. We're going to use the table as our friend, and we're going to hold it down into place so that way we're not burning our fingers, but we're allowing the table to press it up firmly and keep it square. Now that we practice that motion, we'll make sure we have plenty of glue on our hot glue gun, which we do. I always like to focus my bead of glue right in between the foam and the facing paper to glue them together. Got about an 1/8 inch bead is kind of a good guess on the thickness of the glue. I'll take it right to the back. Notice I'm not really concerned over pushing it in quite yet. I'm just getting it lined up. Now I can go ahead and flip it over carefully, press it flat against the table, and I'm simply just going to work from the back to the front, pressing it into place. Now if you put a lot of glue on this and maybe it's squirting out a little bit, every 15 seconds just shift it on the table a little bit, and that's going to keep you from accidentally gluing your fuselage to your table. Just make sure you come back afterwards to scrape off any glue gobs. Now that we have the front portion done, let's go ahead and do the same kind of process on the very front. The only difference here is we're going to be molding this around very carefully to the front nose. And you're going to notice how easy it is to basically be able to bend this with just the thumb and forefinger. And it'll naturally take the curve. We're going to place this into place. And the very edge of our foam should line up with the very bottom of the top plate. And it should come back right to the leading edge of the wing, which it does. All right. Now that we're happy with the way everything fits, I'm going to put a bead of glue on my doublers, and then I'm going to come with a bead of glue on both sides. This is also a really good opportunity to have your little triangle square handy, but we can also flip this over into a rocking motion against the table to be able to press this down. The way we'll do that is once we glue it, we'll put it down on the table. These will be stuck with the glue, and then we can rock it forward, hold it, and then rock it backwards. And we'll do that a couple times over and over and over again until the glue is fully dry. All right, plenty of glue on my hot glue gun. I know where more lives if I need it. I'm just gonna go ahead and focus my glue right down this doubler here. And now I can put my glue, just like I did on the rear here, focusing in between the facing paper and the foam. No reason to panic with any of this. The glue takes a little while to dry. I'm going to press this down into place. Notice that I'm just kind of guiding it, and the tackiness of the hot glue is holding it into place just beautifully. A lot of times people think you really need to rush all this, and you don't. There we go. Now we can flip this over. I'm going to start from the back. I'm going to rock towards the front, hold it down. I'm going to rock it back. Right there, that angle right there, we kind of want to stick real good. Back down to the flat. Rock it up one more time. And then finally rock it back down. And just like that, you can see it's formed beautifully to it and it's glued on secure. Now that we have our main portion of our fuselage built, we're going to do something a little bit different. If you don't already have your electronics, don't worry, you can always put these in later because there's plenty of room to be able to pass electronics through. But right now would be the perfect time to install our servos, our servo arms, and get some of the wiring done. Now our Jenny XL power add-on is the exact same power add-on that we're going to be using here. So you're going to see this power add-on for the Jenny XL or the Triplane. That means as you fly these different airplanes, if you have one that you're ready to retire, you can take the exact same electronics and transition it over. I'm going to go ahead and hunt out the 9-gram servos here. And also 2 of the 60 centimeter servo extensions. There's one, and there's two. Inside this package, we also have linkage stoppers that are incredibly useful. We're going to want those here shortly. Now, because we're using linkage stoppers, centering the servos is not nearly as critical because number one, they're exposed, and number two, these servos already come pre-centered. So as long as you're not moving them around, you're going to be close enough to be able to put these on. If you power the radio on and something moves, you can always unscrew the servo arm and put it in its proper place. If you're ever putting servos in that are internal, you always want to make sure that you center them first before moving on. The only screws and everything that I'm looking for here is the shortest screw for my servo arm, just like that. And I'm going to open up one more box and do the exact same thing. Feel free to keep the extra hardware if you wish. You got lots of extra servo arms and you have lots of extra screws. Always make sure that you choose the shortest plastic screw for this, or else you're going to damage your servo. A little trick that I like to do is I like to actually tie these together in a loose knot and then bring them back together and press them in. Whenever you connect these to a servo extension, make sure that your ground lines line up. In this case, they're going to be either brown or black, and your signal lines line up. In this case, they're going to be either orangish color or white. I'm not going to pull this real tight, just tight enough, and I can wrap it with tape. This gives me a little bit of extra security than just taping them together, and also puts the pressure on the wires and not the plug itself. I'm going to go ahead and pass each of these servos straight through. Just hook this on the bottom. I can even reach in and actually grab it with the wire. Almost there. There we go. I'm going to pull it on through. I want my servo arms to be as close as possible to the control surface. So for that reason, I'm just going to go ahead and leave my arms pointing towards the rear. Same process on the other side. I'm going to tie a loose knot. You can tape them together, you can heat shrink them together. There's really cool 3D printed items you can buy to hook these. This is just how I do it. And I don't pull this tight, I just have a nice loose knot, and then I wrap it with tape. If you don't have your electronics, again, don't be worried. You can still build this entire airplane and put these electronics in later. The only thing that's going to be difficult is when it comes time to do the wings, you're going to have to route everything on the outside. Now that we have our servos in place, I'm just going to put a drop of glue under each wing. Doesn't have to be a lot. I'm going to press it down into place. Now it's nice because we're using linkage stoppers, which means we don't tighten everything down until we power it on for the first time. This is one thing that gives us freedom to really make the whole servo and push rod experience even quicker and easier. Because we used to have to bend everything exactly to place, things had to be exactly centered. Now we can make those adjustments very quickly at the final stage before we fly. Always make sure you check your linkage stoppers and your connections though before every flight to make sure nothing's come loose. Now that I have the servos installed, I'm going to keep the arms and the screws separate from the servos at the moment. The reason is I'm going to be passing the push rods through this, which means I'm going to have to disconnect the arms anyway. Might as well wait until we put on the tail, which is the next step. So here you see our horizontal tail and our vertical tail. We have our stabilizer, our elevator, our vertical fin, and our rudder. The first thing we want to do is prepare each of these. This is going to mean that we're going to be cutting bevel cuts for the hinges, and also weeding out the areas that you see here and here, which is going to allow the tail to sit on the fuselage. I'm going to go ahead and just first start with that. Again, I can take my barbecue skewer and just kind of roll the foam out. If you pop through this, don't worry at all. This is more for aesthetics, just to keep the paper on the top. There we go. And now we can go ahead and cut our bevels. We're only going to be doing a single bevel on these, and I'm going to start with the rudder first. To do this bevel, I'm going to fold it over 90 degrees, and this bevel cut is going to be on the rudder side. Typically, bevel cuts are always on the control surface that moves. The only time we change that is when we have a split tail like you see here. I want as much strength and as much meat as possible, so I do my bevel cut on the stabilizer. Always make sure that you have free movement, at least 45 degrees each way. We're only going to end up moving this about 16 degrees though. All right, I'll just go ahead and do both my reinforcements at the end here. Again, I'm going to be doing my bevel cut on the horizontal tail surface just to keep as much meat on the elevator as possible since it has that cut out. If you ever go to move this up and down and it's fighting you, that means you have a little bit too much meat right in the center here. You can always go back and trim a little bit more or sand a little bit more. Now, just like we did on our ailerons, we're going to press the tip of our glue gun right down between the facing paper and the foam, and we're going to scrape off any excess that we may have. Same process on the bottom portion here. Kind of use it like a paintbrush. I'll let that dry thoroughly. Grab another piece of foam here. And we can do the same on the elevator. If you had free motion before and then it's binding up now, it means that you didn't scrape enough glue off and you probably have some glue globs right on your hinge line that are preventing it from moving. Just go ahead and pull those off and you can always repair it with a little bit more glue or just leave it alone. While we have this on the table, and especially since we're going to be using our linkage stoppers, now would be a really good time to be able to install our control horns. It's just going to make life a little bit easier, and we're not going to have to move as many big pieces around. I'm going to take our control horns right here. I'm going to pop out two. The other two go for the ailerons. Also in our power pack, I'm going to locate our linkage stoppers. I used to not care for linkage stoppers, but I absolutely love these. These are specifically designed for our control horns, whether they're the premium vinyl ones or whether they're our wood ones. For this linkage stopper, I want this to face down. So when I put this in its place, we're going to make sure the holes line up right over the hinge line, and I want my linkage stopper to face down. I'm going to go to the outermost hole here. I'm going to use the table as my friend. I'm just going to press this down right on through. Take your time to not try to twist or move this around, or you could crack the hole that you have for your control horn. If you do that, replace your control horn because it's not going to be strong anymore. Now all I need to do is just take this little rubber plastic keeper on the bottom and press it in. Make sure it moves nice and free. And I'm going to find a little tiny Phillips head right on the top and just twist it in a couple threads. You don't want it to block the hole because it'll block the push rod from passing through. Now I can just double check here. I'm going to press this down into place. Make sure that the linkage stopper is directly over my hinge line, which it is. And once I'm happy with that, I can glue it down. You always want to make sure that your linkage stoppers are facing the direction where you can access it with your screwdriver. If this was pointing up, I'd have to poke a hole through the elevator to get access to my screw. Same process and same logic on the other one here. We're going to want our linkage stopper to be facing outward so I can come in with the screwdriver this way and I don't have to poke a hole through the rudder. So here's my control horn. Here's my linkage stopper. We're going to go to the furthest hole to the outside. Again, I'll come back to the table and use as my friend. I'd highly recommend that you don't press these in between your two fingers because you can press the linkage stopper right into your finger. There we go. Always like to give it a nice twist, make sure it's not binding or fighting you. And then we'll finish off with a little screw on the top. Now we can give it a test fit here. It's right over the hinge line just like we want. Healthy bead of glue right down. And in. I always like to lift it off the table a little bit because sometimes you get a little bit of residual glue on the bottom side and you don't want to glue it to the table. Now that both the elevator and the rudder have everything assembled, let's go ahead and join them together and then we'll put them on the fuselage. Now that our control surfaces are ready to be put together, let's go ahead and do a dry fit real quick. And this would be a really good time to make sure that your triangle square is nearby so we get a perfect 90-degree fit. This is incredibly easy. All we simply need to do is pop it in its tabs, but you'll realize very quickly you can glue this crooked. We're going to go ahead and use a triangle square to hold this up against it to make sure it's perfectly 90 degrees. Now that we're happy with the fit, I personally like to just draw a line right over top here. That way we're not dragging all the glue right over the seam of the back of the elevator. I can lift this up, bring it off to the side, and press it into place. I'm just going to hold this, and I'm mainly just focusing, keeping it pressed down on the elevator and also 90 degrees. We're going to let this fully dry, and then we're going to put a bead of glue on both sides of the vertical stabilizer to lock it in and make it stronger. At that point, it's ready to put on our fuselage. Next step here, now that this is dry, is I'm just going to come by with a nice smooth bead of glue. You're going to notice with the FT300 here, and especially set at medium or just below, there's no bubbling. It just lays a beautiful bead of glue, doesn't smear, doesn't string. And now we're going to go ahead and let that dry for at least 1.5 minutes before moving on to our next step. All right, so you can see that this is all reinforced. It's incredibly strong. We're going to go ahead and do a quick test fit. Once we're happy with the way everything fits and make sure it's 90 degrees, we can glue it down. All we simply need to do is guide through the back. We're going to find the 2 notches on the very bottom, and they should just line up perfectly, and they do, and we'll press it into place. Now we can hold this up at 90, and that's perfect. I'm not going to worry about this bottom flap quite yet here. I'm going to go ahead and open it up just a little bit once we have the top glued down and put some glue in, and then we can secure it. So all I need to do now, put a heavy bead of glue right on the top of the fuselage where the elevator is going to meet. I even put a little bit of glue, just a very small smear of glue right on those tabs. And I can guide it right down in there. Line it up, and then press it into the 2 tabs. It's always a good idea every time to make sure you're 90 degrees. If you check this every single time, it'll keep everything straight on your build. Once this is dry, we're going to go back the same way we did with our vertical stabilizer here and put a bead of glue on both sides for that extra strength that we need. All right, our glue is now dry. I'm just going to run a bead of glue right along the bottom here on both sides. As I mentioned before, I can kind of open this one portion up. I'm just going to squeeze my nozzle right down in there and put a bead of glue. And then I can use a scrap piece of foam and wipe off any residual that we may have. While we're working on the bottom of the fuselage, now would be a really great time to put the lower keel on. So this is your lower keel here, and you're going to see that it simply just presses in just like you see here. We're always going to do a test fit. After that, we can lift it up. I'll place some bead of glue right down on there, and we'll press it down and glue it into place. And just like before, it's always nice to come back and put a bead of glue on any areas that are going to deal with high stress. Now, included in our kit, we have these barbecue skewers. These barbecue skewers are really useful to be able to reinforce key areas, especially like this tail skid. All I simply need to do is protrude it about a 1/2 inch beyond it. I'll use my fingernail or a pair of pliers. I'll crack it, and then I can come back with a thin bead of glue and press it in. So now that we're working on the bottom of the fuselage, we have our servos in, our control horns in. Let's just go ahead and finish off those linkages by pushing in our push rods. The first surface I'm going to work on is going to be our elevator surface. Now for this, we don't need a lot of elevator control, so it's really important that we go to the middle hole that you see here. If you go to the outer hole, this plane is incredibly short coupled, and that over control of the elevator is going to make it wander through the air, or you're going to have to dial your throws way down. Putting it on the middle hole here is going to give you the perfect amount of control to still do some incredible aerobatics, but also make the airplane fly really smooth. I like to just kind of hold the push rod right over where we're going to need it. And when I cut this push rod short, I'm going to cut it about 1/4 inch longer than what we actually need. This gives us room to make adjustments forward or backwards for up and down. We give you a lot more push rod material than you need, so you can always just bend another Z-bend if you wish, but save this material because if you choose to scratch build an airplane later or help out a friend, you have it with you. Now I can go ahead and pass my push rod right through the linkage stopper. I'm going to make sure that the control horn is 90 degrees to my servo. This is going to give me even throw up and down. And I'm not going to screw this in place until we power everything on. But what I am going to do is tighten down my servo arm. If your servo arm moves a little bit as you're tightening it, don't worry, because we're going to power everything on before we tighten down our linkage stoppers, and that will recenter it. There we go. One down, one to go. For our next push rod installment, I'm going to go to the outermost hole for the rudder. This plane takes an incredible amount of rudder, and we actually even have to dial in a mix between rudder and aileron, just like the original one had, to give us the ability to have a nice coordinated turn. So for that reason, I'm going to go all the way to the outside. I'm going to hook it into place. There we go. And I'm just going to kind of hold this over and once again go about 1/4 inch past the linkage stopper and then cut it there. Again, I'm going to save my push rod material for later builds. Always comes in handy. Pass it through. And then press my servo arm down 90 degrees from the servo. If you have the servo arm angled forward or backward, you're going to get uneven deflection. Now, ironically, that's exactly what we're going to do when we do our ailerons, because we want the aileron to go up more than it goes down. This is called differential aileron. It helps the airplane not have adverse yaw and fly even better. And finally, I'm just going to go ahead and screw down my servo arm. This is a step that if you neglect, it doesn't matter how beautiful your airplane is, when it comes loose, you simply won't have any control. There we go. Now that we have both of our controls hooked up, our push rods in, we do want to make sure that we go back and tighten those on our final steps, but we are ready to move on with our build. Now that the main portion of our fuselage is now done, we're ready to move on to installing our wings, all 3 of them. The first wing we're going to install first though is going to be the lower one. And you're going to notice on the lower one here that we have these little tiny tick marks that have already been cut into the front leading edge and also this notch in the back. The first thing we're going to do is give it a quick test fit on our fuselage, make sure everything lines up, but also make sure on the bottom where the wing meets the fuselage, we don't have any glue globs or trimming that we need to do. To do this, all we simply need to do is rotate this in the back. You should see that line up nice and flush. And as we push this down, if you have any fit issues or any glue globs that are keeping you from having this almost flush, go ahead and take your knife and trim it out now. I like to just lay this flat on the table here and putting my fingers right on top of the doublers where it's real strong, just press it in, and you're going to see that very front piece go down flat against the table. That's exactly what we want to see. You're also going to notice a little tiny etch mark right on each side of the fuselage, and that's going to tell us that our wing is perpendicular and also centered. Once we're happy with that, I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to put a healthy bead of glue right on the bottom here. And then I'm going to come down and press it into place. Again, line it right up over those notches. I'm just going to scrape off any extra glue that we may have. And I'm putting even flat pressure, just like when we were assembling our wing. I'm not pushing down real hard. I'm just keeping it even, consistent, and spread out. Give this about 1.5 minutes to fully dry before moving on to the next step. Now before we glue on the second middle wing here, we're going to locate our 2 60-centimeter wires. Now this is something that you need your electronics for to be able to do this, or you're going to have to route your wires through the bottom of the wing and then kind of cut a hole in there. It's not going to look very pretty. We're going to want to make sure that the end that goes into the receiver is going to be pointing forwards. And all I simply need to do is simply pass this through. I'm gonna hold the top on there, and I'm gonna pass the other portion right down the center of the spar. All the way in. And we can just use gravity as our friend, just kind of let it fall down naturally. And there we go. This portion here is going to be what attaches to our servo. We can even tuck this down below right before we put everything together to be able to make it even nicer and neater. But I like to keep this up so it doesn't accidentally fall out. Let's go ahead and do the same process now on the other side. Again, we're taking the portion that goes into the receiver. We're going to slide it right on through. Gravity and a little jiggling goes a long way. And then I'll just leave this top portion out on the top. Now that we have the extension wires run through our middle wing here, our next step is to do a test fit of both our struts and our wing itself. Now the struts are going to actually be what align our wing up to make the proper movement forward or backward. So we're going to go ahead and slide those first through the middle wing and then slide it through the bottom wing, and then we'll see where the wing sits on the fuselage. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep my servo extensions here right by the notch that we have, and I'm going to delicately press our struts on through. Press these struts so they go down to the top surface of the wing. And this is going to be the exact angle that we want to be able to have protrude down through our lower wing. Now we can slide our struts through the lower wing. Perfect. Now every plane's going to be a little different, but if we assembled the wings and everything consistently, we should see the leading edge line up with the very top opening of the fuselage right at the very front. Now we do have a couple different options for when we put our servo wires down. If you want to have your servos serviceable, we can just leave the very tip of our servo extension up like you see here. If you want to be able to guide your servo wires through and have this be one straight line, you can go ahead and make your connection, tape it, and then pull that extension through and then pass your strut on through. For me, I'm just going to go ahead and coil up any extra servo wire that I have on the side here and use a piece of tape to secure it down. When I paint this, it's going to paint right over the tape and you're not going to see it. And finally, for our last check to make sure that the wing is not canted one way or the other, we should be able to sight down the leading edge and line up the bottom leading edge of the wing and see that they're parallel. If they're crooked at all, rotate your wing one way or the other. One nice thing about these struts is if they're pushed to the top surface of the wing, they should be exactly parallel with each other, which will make it line up beautifully. Everything looks really good. We're ready to go ahead and make our marks just to mark where this location is, and we're going to glue down our wing. I'm going to carefully just move my wing to the side here, make sure I have plenty of hot glue, and put a nice healthy bead right on the very top of my fuselage. You're going to notice that the center seam of the wing should line up right with the center tabs of our turtle deck cutouts. It's a good way to reference what's in the middle. I'm going to go ahead and repeat the exact same motion I just did. Just bring this right over, push this down into place. Make my alignment once again. And I'm going to hold it in place until the glue fully cures. Once the center of our wing is glued down, we can then move our struts up just a little bit. I'm going to place a bead of glue right on the very bottom underneath where the struts are going to go down. And then I'm going to press my strut down in place. We're going to give this about a minute to a minute and a half to fully dry before we move on to the other side. And on the other side, again, I'm just going to make sure as I slide this up, I'll get my servo extension where I want it. That looks great. And then I'm going to focus glue right underneath that strut. Now keep in mind, these connect the wings and make it incredibly strong, but by themselves, if you tip this over, you can easily crinkle these. So take your time to take care of these pieces here before we get the top wing on so you don't bend them. And the easiest way to lock in the struts on the very bottom is to simply put a bead of glue on both sides of the strut and the lower wing. We can also flip this over later and reinforce it with some hot glue right up to where the strut meets the lower spar. Now that our lower and our center wing are done, we're ready to move on to our next step, which is the turtle deck. So for our turtle decks, we have the pieces that you see here. We're gonna go ahead and weed these out and also peel the facing paper off of some of them. We have our 4 main formers. We have our front nose turtle deck. We have our center section turtle deck right here. And then we have the rear portion of our turtle deck. We're gonna go ahead and prepare all these pieces by removing the foam from the outside corners, peeling the facer paper in the middle, and also weeding out our formers as well. I'm gonna go and do that right now. Feel free to pause the video, and when we're done, make sure your pieces look just like mine. Whenever you're moving the facing paper, don't try to pull it off where you just kind of keep on pulling it higher and higher, because it may cause the facing paper to rip and make it difficult to remove. If you just start from one edge and then pull vertically and keep the area that you pull very close to the foam itself, rather than pulling up here, you keep pulling up here and then work it off, you're gonna find that it will release in one piece and very clean. Feel free to pause the video if you wish, but we're gonna go ahead and go through what we did to each one of these pieces. For all 3 pieces of our outer turtle deck skin, we removed the outer foam on the outside and also removed the facing paper. Later on, we're gonna go back and we're gonna cut a 45-degree bevel cut on the different areas to allow it to curve into the fuselage. For our main formers here, we just removed the center channel so we can do our C-folds where they'll fold 180 degrees. We're gonna put these aside for right now. We're gonna go ahead and prepare our formers and we're gonna glue them into place. Do a quick test fit. And just like we did with our doublers, we're just gonna go ahead and trace the perimeter, little thin ribbon on the bottom, and fold it over. Always make sure that your outer perimeter, whenever you're doing a C-fold, lines up with each other, and let it dry. Same steps for all 4 of our formers. While the formers are drying, we can take our razor blades and carefully cut a 45-degree bevel around the perimeter of each of our pieces. This is going to really help us seat in our pieces nice and flush, so when we glue them in, there's not going to be a big gap. To do this, I'm just going to carefully take my razor blade, that's flat on the table, and trace around the perimeter. I have the tip of my razor blade dulled so it won't cut through the facing paper. And again, this area does not have to be perfect because it's going to be on the bottom. No one's going to see it. Feel free to pause your video, make sure all your pieces look just like this. When you're ready, we'll move on to the next step, which is gluing in our formers. I always like to do test fits on our formers here, and that's what we're going to do right here. You're going to notice that it's going to center up with roughly 1 thickness of foam on each side. Test fit each of our formers, and when you're happy with the fit, glue them in. Give this about a minute to a minute and a half to fully dry, and we'll start preparing our top turtle deck. Before we put our turtle decks on, we want to establish a little bit of a curve to match as much as we can our formers. To do this, we can simply take it to the edge of the table, and with a little bit of down pressure and some rolling against the edge of the table, we can easily start establishing a nice healthy curve. I don't try to do this all at one time. I simply use the table as my friend and slowly work towards the end. I like to form the best I can each piece and give it a quick test fit individually before I finally glue them on. But once you've established the right curve, you're going to find that these will line up beautifully and go right down to the edge. Here's one. This last piece that's kind of double connected here, same process. I'm just working on one piece at a time. Now that we have all of our pieces formed and test fit, one thing I'd recommend getting is something called derm tape, or you can use basically frosted half-inch masking tape. Derm tape is something that's used a lot in the medical field, but it's also very popular with model airplanes. We're actually going to start carrying this in our store in the very near future. This dermal tape also goes invisible real easy for you, so when you build your models, you're not going to see it. I'm going to go ahead and cut the derm tape on the very back, the very first piece I'm going to put down, put it on both sides. That way when I go ahead and I put my glue on, I can use the tape to pull down and put in place. So I'm first going to start with my rear piece, then I'm going to flip this up, do my center, and then continue working forward until the very front nose is done. That gives me the ability to be able to shingle each piece, so as you look from the front towards the back, all of it looks like one solid piece. So again, I'm going to line this up here. Our alignment's going to be basically where it goes straight over the very middle of the former, so each former has its own section. That looks really good. And one tip here, if you don't like burning your fingers and you want a nice, steady, consistent place to put pressure on, in our crafty kit, we have this metal roller. This works really good to be able to hold down the edges here. It'll rapidly cool the glue and give you a nice finished seam. I'm gonna keep that right by me. I've done my test fitting, and I'm just gonna do one side at a time for a moment. That way I have plenty of time to work with this. There's that. Right down in the center. Notice I don't really have to rush for anything, do I? Tape this down and hold it in place. With that metal on it, we only need about 30 seconds and it's fully dry. How's it look on your end? I can't see it.
Good.
Cool. Once that side's dry, I'm going to carefully lift up the other side. And unfortunately, it's going to be an awkward angle, but it's very easy for gluing. I'm just going to put a little bit of glue right down the seam here. Just like that. Now I can pull the tape down right where I need it to go. There we go. Now that we have the rear turtle deck done, we're gonna do the exact same process as we move forward, making sure that we put a little bit of pressure and slowly shingle over each piece so it looks like one consistent piece. This piece is so short, I really don't need to put the tape on. I'm probably gonna do that afterwards. I've already test fitted it. So now I can go ahead and put my glue down right on the formers. And a bead of glue on each side. So I don't burn my fingers, I'm gonna go ahead and use that ruler. There's one side, and then there's the other side. Right. Same process in the middle. All right, our turtle deck is now done. We're ready to move on to our next step, which is installing the servos before ultimately we put on our top wing. We're gonna do the same process that we did for our tail here. First thing we're gonna do is pass through our servo lead, and we're gonna make sure that our servo arm is pointing towards the back and also out towards the wingtip. So we'll simply pass this on through. Support this from the very back here. And once we're happy with the fit, I'm just gonna put a drop of glue under each wing and push it in. Now for our connection here, I'm gonna make sure that I line up my signal with my signal and my ground with my ground. I can now fold up my wire lead and cover it up with a piece of packing tape, dermal tape, scotch tape, anything you want. All right, same process as before. We're gonna make sure that the arm points towards the trailing edge. Keep that servo linkage as short as possible. We're gonna carefully pass through one side and then the other. And just like before, I'm just gonna carefully pull out my connector, make sure my signal and my ground wires line up. And because I want this to be serviceable in case, God forbid, I strip out a servo, I'm just gonna tape the excess wire right up against the inside of the strut. Now we're gonna bring in our top wing, and we're gonna prepare it the same way that we prepared our tail. We're gonna go ahead and install our control horns with the linkage stoppers already installed, and that way it'll be super easy whenever we put our push rods through to line everything up. Let's go ahead and pop out our 2 remaining control horns, and we're gonna go to the outermost hole, and we're gonna make sure that when we press our linkage stopper in, that they're on opposing sides so they point out towards the wing tips. We'll just use our table as our friend. Press it down carefully. Make sure we don't wiggle it and break our control horn. Always make sure you put the little back stopper on. These linkage stoppers are available separately, so if you're scratch building this plane, or maybe you trace out the parts and you're wanting to build another one, you can get these separate from our power packs if you need to. But they are included also in our power packs, specifically the one that goes to this plane, and also all of our other main A, B, C, and F power packs. Now I'm just mirroring each side to make sure I have a left and a right control horn. And there we go. This control horn is going to go on one side of the wing, and then this one will go on the other. Again, we just want to make sure that it fits. Again, we want to make sure it points towards the outside, and also that the control horn lines directly over top of our hinge line. Once you confirm that the control horn lines directly over your hinge line, we can go ahead and glue it down. Same process on the other side. We're going to do a quick test fit. Confirm the whole of our linkage stopper is directly over our hinge line, and then we'll glue it down. Let these two control horns dry for at least a minute to a minute and a half because you do not want them being loose or coming apart when you're in flight. While the glue is drying for our control horns, we can locate the small single arm servo arms and also the smallest screw that we have in the bag to hold down our servo arm into the servo. Before we glue our wing down, we're going to do a test fit just like we did on the middle one. First thing we're going to do is we're going to gently line up the tabs on the very bottom of the wing and make sure that they easily slide through our struts. You should see the bottom of the wing match up exactly with the bottom strut. Confirm that the bottom surface of all your wings are parallel with each other. This could be simply done by putting a ruler up on each side and comparing it to the height of the table, or just by eyeballing it. A good rule of thumb is if basically the bottom of the strut lines up perfectly with the bottom of the wing, it should be straight for you. Once you're happy with the fit, we can gently rock this off. We'll place a bead of glue on both struts and then we'll glue it down. I like to work one side at a time. Notice I'm keeping the other side higher than it should be. There's one side. And there's the other side. Now I'm simply going to press down and make sure that both sides are fully seated. You can go back later once this is fully dried and you can run another bead of glue right along the bottom surface of the strut and the wing surface to make even more strength. Now you're going to notice that all three wings are held in place, but the top wing can still wiggle. That's because it doesn't have its center cabane struts. The center cabane struts look just like what you see right here, and it's going to look very similar to the landing gear. So take your time to make sure you found the pieces that don't have the double fold over in the front leading edge. These struts are going to actually come in at an angle. So what we want to do is we want to bevel the one side of one strut, and on the top portion of it, bevel the opposite side. This gives us the ability to fit flat against the wing and also flat against the bottom of the upper wing. We're going to do this one at a time to make sure we don't accidentally cut two lefts or two rights. I like to cut roughly a 40 to 45 degree angle. So we just did the top of this side. Now we're going to do the opposite side on the bottom. Now for fitting, we should be able to go into the wing here, and right where the wing meets up, as we rotate it up into place, you're going to see that it just sits at a slight angle and it just rests against the bottom of the wing. Wherever this touches against the wing is where you want to set. You don't want to try to cause your wing to bow up or push your wing to bow it down. You want the cabane to come up and meet your wing for you. Once you're happy with the fit, we'll go ahead and apply a bead of glue on the beveled sides on the top and the bottom of the cabane strut, and we'll put it in place. I like to work a little bit quick on this so I don't smear too much glue. The nice thing about running the glue gun just a little bit cooler is it doesn't take long before you can kind of smear it without burning yourself. And that looks good. Once this is dry, we can again reinforce it with a bead of glue on both sides. Now we're going to do the same process on the other side. I'm going to go ahead and bring it in for a test fit. That's going to tell me the exact side that I need to bevel. And I can take that and I can immediately bevel it, making sure I don't make the wrong side. I'm holding this in the air just to make sure you guys can see it nice and clearly, but it is very easy to take this to the table and support it. So there's the bevel on this side. I'm going to take the bevel on the top side on the opposite. Same process before. We'll test fit it, make sure it fits nice and flat. And as long as our wing's not twisted, and as long as we did everything properly, you should see that these are at the exact same angle. We come down, put a bead of glue on both sides. Careful not to drip. Start with the bottom, and then rotate it up to the top. All right, so our wing is now all attached here. We are done gluing our 3 wings in here, and the really cool thing is this went from once being very flimsy to now I can pick up the whole airplane and it's completely supported. Incredibly strong, and if you guys saw the release video of what we did with it, with the prototypes, it's incredible the amount of abuse this plane can take. I'm gonna now put this upside down so I can access the bottom, and I'm gonna put my push rods in. One thing that's a little bit different is typically I tell you to put your servo arm perpendicular to the actual servo itself. In this case, we're gonna jet the servo arms way towards the front leading edge. The reason is we want a lot more up deflection than we want down. So typically I'd say 1 notch. In this case, we're gonna go at least 2 notches forward to get almost a 45-degree angle pointing towards the leading edge. I'm gonna go ahead and install my little servo arm to the furthest out hole. We got lots of control deflection. Get rid of my little glue stringies here. And now typically where this is perpendicular, we're gonna go 1, 2 notches forward. I'm gonna hold my aileron up right in line with the servo arm, or I'm gonna hold my aileron right in line with the wing here. I'm gonna go roughly 1/4 inch back, mark it with my finger, and I'm gonna cut it. Cool. Now I can go back one final time. I'm going to pass this time the push rod through the linkage stopper. And again, it's perpendicular. There's 1 notch. There's 2 notches forward. Now I can go ahead and screw my servo arm in place. And we're not going to tighten down the linkage stopper until we power on all the servos. If for some reason your servo is extremely out of center, you can always loosen your servo arm and readjust it. All right, that's one side. Let's go and do the same process on the other side. We're going to go ahead and pass our servo push rod through the outermost hole on our single-sided servo arm. And just like the other one, we're going to find perpendicular. We're going to go 1 notch forward, and then ultimately 2 notches forward. We're going to 1/4 inch past, and we'll cut it. Pass this right through our hole. One notch, 2 notches. And once we're happy with it, we'll lock it down with our servo screw. There we are. All of our servo connections are now made. We're ready to move on to our next step, which is bending the landing gear together and install it into the airplane. Now that we have our main airframe done, we're actually going to move out to my shop desk because I have a vise and a wire bender there. Vices and wire benders are incredibly useful, especially during bending these bigger, thicker landing gears. If you don't have one, get one. Wire benders and an affordable vices can easily be found at Harbor Freight or even on Amazon. We can put a link down below for you. We use them all the time. So the pieces that we're going to need for our landing gear are going to be our plywood pieces, our 2 thick landing gear wires, our 4 wheel collars, and of course our wheels. First thing we want to do is sandwich 2 of the 3 plywood pieces together. We're going to go ahead and do that right now. You're going to notice the middle piece here has a complete cutout for the wood, while the outer pieces only have etch marks to line up. Our first step is to take our Zap adhesive, and we're going to place a bead of glue right along the inside. Now, a real easy way to be able to make this secure is just spray the other side with some of our kicker. We're going to line up right over the edge lines, and we're going to press it down into place. We absolutely love working with Zap products here. They have a great lineup here, whether it's foam safe CAs, thick, thin, and medium CA grips, and so many other great products. All of that is available in our store. All right, same process on the other side here. I'm just gonna line it up, make sure everything fits good. We'll put our bead of glue down. I kind of treat it similar to hot glue. Just keep it on the inside a little bit. When I spray my kicker, I'm gonna make sure I don't accidentally activate my instant glue. Carefully line it up right over the edge lines. And then press it in place. Now we have our cavity to be able to put our landing gear wire in. For this, I'm just going to go ahead and simply mark with my finger about 1/4 inch in on each side. That way when we have the radius and the bend, we don't have to worry about it sticking out the other side. This is our wire bender that you may see in a lot of our videos. We absolutely love this thing. It's about 50 bucks if I'm not mistaken. I think you can get it down closer to 40 if you search. But we absolutely love how this thing works. All we simply do is clamp it in and bend it over. I always like to bend it a little bit more than what I need to, because then when I unbend it, in this case I didn't do it enough. Go ahead and change the die here. There we go. I'm going to bend it a little bit more than what I need it. That way when I open it up a little bit, that corner will be a little bit sharper. There's that. A little bit more. And there we go. There's one side, we're going to do the other side. Once again, I'm going to go about 1/4 inch in from the edge. Right on down. And bend it over. If you did everything right, you should have a nice friction fit on both sides. Once you're happy with the fit, I'm going to take my CA, I'll lay it right down over both of the wires. And I'm going to go ahead and go around the perimeter. Really fill this in good. Get it nice and wet. And we're going to press it in place. Now that we have our main section of our plywood and our landing gear bent, our next step here is to measure 6 inches from where it protrudes from the bottom and mark that with a marker. So I'm just going to go ahead and measure 6 inches. And I'll place a mark on this side. Same thing, 6 inches. Place a mark on the opposite side. Now again, we can take this to our wire bender. I'm going to line up the mark right on the edge. I think this is called a die. And I'm going to bend it. Same process on the other side. Let me just kind of continue my mark on the opposite way. There we go. Again, I'm lining that mark up right with the tip of this die, taking all the way to the bottom so it's as flat as possible. Keeping the rest of my wire parallel to the table. And we're bending it. We can easily make small adjustments at this point to make sure that the landing gear is flat on the bottom. And also when we sit it on its side, that everything is parallel to the table. This will make sure that our airplane track's nice and straight. It's a lot easier to do this now. I'm gonna go ahead and line up our wheel collars. Now, a lot of times during manufacturing here, these have a little bit of a burr on them, and these wheel collars are the exact size of our wires, which means you may have to do a little bit of sanding on the edge here to be able to get them to pass over easily. But don't worry, they will do that. I'm just gonna go ahead and bring my first wheel collar down, and then I'm gonna lock it in right around here. Basically about 1/8 of an inch right from my edge line. Same process on the other side. Little twisting motion. This one has that little burr I was telling you about. There we go. Now we can bring in our wheels. And lock them down. Now we're going to be removing our wheels later on when we put our fairings in for the landing gear. If you're looking for just a fun fly experience and a fun fly triplane, you don't need to put all these extra details on. You'll get great performance and they'll fly just great. But if you really want to have that iconic look of the triplane with the little wing going between the landing gear, you're going to have to remove these wheels here shortly. But what we're doing here is we're trying to find out exactly where we need to cut this wire so we don't make it too short for the wheels. There we go. And that looks nice and straight. This is a really good opportunity to make sure that everything is positioned exactly how we want to, and it looks great. Next, I'm going to take a big pair of bolt cutters or wire cutters, and I'm going to cut these about 1/4 inch from the wheel collar. Now, put this down. There's one. There's two. Our landing gear is now done. Let's head back in the shop and we'll put it in the airplane. All right, now that we have our landing gear bent, we're gonna go ahead and install it under fuselage. You're gonna notice a couple little tiny tick marks right along the back edge here that are gonna be black. Those are gonna be the indicators of where our doublers are gonna be. We're gonna wanna line up our ruler with them and cut out that cavity. Let's go ahead and do that right now. So I see one tick mark right here, one tick mark right here, and on the other side, one tick mark right here, and one tick mark right there. Now we can take our ruler and we can open up the cavity. All right, feel free to trim and test fit to make sure that the landing gear easily slides down into place. Then with the rocking motion, we should be able to press this down into place all the way to the bottom, just like that. Now you can choose to glue this into place, or you can go ahead and let it be friction fit. That friction fit's gonna hold very well, but if it ever starts getting loose, you can easily take a hot glue gun and put a bead of glue on each side. One thing, because of its tight fit, I would not recommend doing is gluing it in place and trying to slide it in, because it could cure before you get all the way down. Also, not gluing it into place quite yet gives you the ability to rock this and adjust it a little bit so we can put our landing gear flarings on if you choose. So let's go ahead and put this on the mains here. We'll make sure everything is nice and level. And for some people that just want a fun scale experience, this may be all the further you want to go. You may not want to carry the extra drag around, and you may want to keep this nice and durable, especially if you're on rougher ground. But we're going to go ahead and take this one more step further. We're going to add some really cool scale detail, and that's going to be the landing gear flarings and the wing in the center of the landing gear. So the pieces that you see here are the optional pieces that you can choose to put on your triplane to add some extra scale detail. The first thing we're going to notice that both sides of our fuselage have a score cut going down the middle. We're going to go ahead and do a double bevel on this score cut to give us the ability to have a nice fold over. This is going to make this fairing even stronger, but also aerodynamic. To do that, we're just going to do a simple double bevel, just like we've been doing on our wings. Make sure this one is at least 45 degrees, if not more. It'll make that whole fold over a lot easier for you. Again, I want to make sure I can easily go over 90 degrees. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to use the table as my friend here, and I'm going to gently push down to make sure I can get the complete 180 degree fold over. Once I'm happy with that, I can come back with a bead of glue. I go right down the middle and on the far edge. Again, going down, using the table as my friend. We're going to press down. And we're going to hold this section down for at least a minute to a minute and a half and let it fully cool. There we go. There's one side. Again, practice on the other side, nice and slow. If you try to go too quickly, sometimes it'll cause it to split on you. Good. And once we're happy with it, bead down the middle. Bead on the edge. And hold it for a minute to a minute and a half. Now our next step, you're going to see that we have a score cut here where we can fold these two flaps over 180 degrees. We're going to want to go ahead and cut a bevel cut at least 45 degrees on the side that we just folded over. So in other words, we don't want to do any bevel cut on this portion right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a slight slime motion, make sure my fingers are away. Actually, I'm just going to take this to the table. There's one side. And there's the other side. Now that we have our 45 degree bevels cut on the bottom, we're going to do a similar thing to the top. We're going to cut a 45 degree bevel on the side of the fold over, and then we're going to go to the opposite side and cut a 45 degree bevel there. This will allow us to meet up to the fuselage, and this will allow us to meet up to the wing. So we're going to take it to the edge of the table and cut our 45 degree bevel. There's one. Now I can flip it over to the other side. And there's two. Let's go ahead and do the other side now the same way. Edge of the table. .45. Flip it over. And 45. Feel free to pause the video and make sure your pieces look just like what you see here. And we're going to bring our fuselage in and we'll glue it on. So for this step, I'm going to remove my wheels here. We should be able to keep the inner wheel collars on, but you may need to adjust them out a little bit or turn it so you can have access to the grub screw. Now we can go ahead and do a test fit of our landing gear. The back of our landing gear should meet up perfectly with the back that you see here, right up against the wire. This fold over is going to give it, again, lots of strength, and it's also going to cover up your landing gear wire. As we fold these forward here, you're going to notice here that that just protrudes just on the other side of the wheel collar, and that's exactly what we want. If you're happy with the fit, you can go ahead and put a bead of glue along all these edges and glue it in place. So it's always a little bit challenging here, but I'm going to put a bead of glue first on this side, second on this side, and then finally right inside here and down here. Same motion as before. Rock that right into place. Up, fold these over. There we go. And then we're going to press it in. Once this is dry, we can come back with a bead of glue and reinforce it. The landing gear should be coming into the wing at a 90-degree angle. If it's kicked one way or the other, make sure it's 90 degrees, but everything should jig exactly to give you that angle, so you shouldn't have to worry about it. Again, we're going to always make sure we do a test fit. We're going to bring it in here. Lift it up. And that looks pretty good. This piece is fighting me just a little bit, but the only reason it is because this is the piece that is further towards the center. Not a big deal at all. Sometimes I think the hardest thing is popping this part right here. There we go. And once we're happy again, bead of glue to reinforce it. Our final piece is going to be the little wing in the center of the landing gear. I don't really know what this is called, but I always know it's pretty darn cool. And when you press this down into place, you're going to see that it's going to line up beautifully. Now, if we just glue this in on the tabs, it's not going to be strong enough, and as we take those hits, it's eventually going to break. For that reason, I'm not only going to glue this, but once the glue is dry, I'm going to come back with some tape and reinforce it. That's going to marry all those pieces together. So, I've test fitted, I'm happy with everything. I'm going to put some glue right on there, on both sides. Then I'm going to press it into place. There's one side, and there's the other. One thing you want to make sure is when you glue this into place, make sure that your angle isn't up or down. Make sure it lines up right with the actual landing gear piece to keep it in line with the wing. Now that we have this bottom wing glued in place, let's go ahead and secure it and marry it all together with a piece of tape on both sides. We don't need to go from one piece to the other. I simply like to take about a 4-inch piece, cut a slit into it, wrap it around, and pull it over the wing. So here we go. I got about a 6-inch piece right here. And I'll just pull that one down, tape it, and then pull the other one down and tape it. Nice thing is the wheel covers this area, so you're never going to see it. Same thing on the other side. And now we can go ahead and put our wheels back on. All right, our landing gear is now done. We're ready to move on to our next step, which is a power pod. So in this portion of the build, we're going to be focusing on the power pod. Now, if you plan on flying this with the optional pan tilt FPV system, you're going to notice that the portion for that mounts to in the cockpit builds the exact same way. So that's why I have this here in the upper left-hand corner. Here we have our main power pod, we have our firewall, and something very important to point out is because this has right thrust, the motor is shifted a little bit to the left. For that reason, I went ahead and put an indicator on the top left-hand corner of the firewall indicating which side it goes on. We also have gotten a lot of feedback from the community, and it's really easy to loop these real tight. So we're now putting a battery strap and a battery strap reinforcement in this. This is something I plan on hopefully going back on other version 2s of XLs so people don't lose their batteries mid-flight. This little piece of wood gives us the ability to have reinforcement inside the power pod. And along with that, we also have in our kit a single strap. Now, this power pod is going to basically build the exact same way as all of our other XL power pods, with the exception of our new little reinforcement plate. Let's go ahead and first weed out all the pieces that we need for both the firewall power pod and also our extra little bracket. We'll go ahead and do our test bends, and then we'll glue it together. By now, it should be pretty natural just to go right through the score cuts, 3/4 of the way down. Feel free to pause the video at this moment, make sure all your pieces look just like what you see here, and we're ready to move on to the next step. The first thing we're going to put our attention to is we're going to go ahead and do a C-fold on each side. You're going to notice that the C-fold is going to be flush on the very top, and it's going to line up with the bottom of the score cut on the bottom. Once you're happy with this, we can go ahead and open it up, place some glue down, and then fold it over. Again, we're focusing about a 1/2 inch on the inside, then ribbon the glue right on the paper, fold it over, give it a little bit of a wiggle, and hold it in place. Same process on the other side. We'll do a quick test fit, make sure we're happy with it. Right around the perimeter, and a little stream right down the paper. Fold it over, wiggle it, hold it in place. Our little battery mount is going to actually be captured by the side cheeks of our power pod. So for that reason, we're going to go ahead and place it right over the edge marks, make sure we're happy with it. And once we're happy with it, I'm just going to place a little bit of glue right along the wood, and then press it down right over the edge marks and hold it in place. Now, because this is an A-fold, we're going to go ahead and leave the side plates firmly against the table, and we're going to rotate the bottom plate up 90 degrees. This is going to give us the proper A-fold. To do our A-fold, we're going to first test it, roll it up, we're going to hit 90. We can always use our triangle square if we wish to be able to make sure we get exactly 90 degrees. And now that we're happy with the way everything fits, I'm going to place the majority of the glue right on the bottom of the side plate, and in this case on both cheeks. Can even do a little bit where it's going to touch that wood. Again, the side plate goes firmly against the side or the bottom of the table. We're going to rotate up 90. And I'm going to hold that square until it fully dries. Now that we have one side done, we'll go ahead and repeat the process on the other side. We can easily get up to 90, no problem there. Now the glue comes down, starting and stopping about a 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch from the edge. Right back on the table, up to 90. If you've been building along with swappables, A-folds, B-folds, C-folds, single and double bevel cuts are something that should be very common by now for you. The neat thing is the more you build, the better you get at these, and the faster your build projects are completed. Now, a common rule of thumb with any time we have a power pod is we're always going to look at the A-fold or the indicator, and the A-fold is going to point towards the firewall. Another real easy way to be able to identify which is the front of our power pod is you're going to notice that the front of the power pod actually has an angle which is going to shift the motor to the right. This right thrust is going to be able to properly account for the thrust angle for the motor and help our plane track straight and true. Now, if I face this away from me as if I'm the pilot in the airplane, my left side is my left side, my right side is the right side. So my firewall is pointing forwards. Now I'm going to go ahead and take my firewall with my left hand indicator on my left side right here. I'm going to place it on the very front, and I'm going to give it a quick test fit. If everything's correct, what we should see is that it's flush pretty much on all 3 of the sides. Once we're happy with that, we can apply a bead of glue on all 3 sides and glue it in place. A really important step that you don't want to neglect is our next step was we're going to reinforce this with tape. You don't want to just simply glue your firewall on and go flying, because after a couple flip overs or maybe some motor runs or it gets warm, the firewall is going to fall off. All right, so I'm going to first start by putting my glue right on the left-hand side. I like to use that undercut from the laser to really help me with my glue, holding it down. All right, just flip that right there. I'm going to squeegee off anything on the bottom here, and now I can go right down to the table, hold that. I'll use a scrap piece of foam, wipe off any excess. This is a really good way to make sure that your firewall and that your power pod is nice and square, because your firewall is square. We're going to hold this in place for a good minute to a minute and a half. Make sure you shift it every once in a while so you don't accidentally glue it to the table. And then we're going to reinforce it with some tape. Now that my glue is fully dry, I'm just going to go ahead and place this up. Again, we should make sure that the angle of the motor is going off to the right, and also that our left-hand indicator is on our left-hand side of our power pod, and it is. I like to take about a foot of 2-inch packing tape, and I like to just basically start right on the firewall, splitting the difference between the two. There's one side, and there's the other. Another layer about 1 foot long. I like to overlap them right in the middle. One side, then the other. And then finally, we'll go about 6 inches long here. I'm going to bring this up. And my goal is to allow this to track down to the back half of the power pod and cover that up. So at the end of the day, we're going to have about 4 layers right on the firewall, gripping all around it. It's going to be plenty strong for you. One last 6-inch piece. Right on the corner. And there we go. We're going to use our utility knife, and we're going to carefully cut out the access holes that we need so our wires can easily pass through. Don't neglect using the center hole, because if you do, that's going to possibly put a binding on your motor, cause it to overheat, and also slow down premature. It's just going to put a lot of extra wear and tear on your motor and give you false problems. And I like to just go along with every single one of my holes, whether we're using the X mount or we're using the internal motor screws from the back. We're all set. Once we passed our wires through our firewall, you're going to notice that it's going to line up with our X mount holes that we have right on our firewall. Just line up the holes that line up with your X mount. Take the included screws that we have, and if you don't have these screws, you can always use your Servo screws. And we're simply going to lay this down right over the hole and screw it in place. This motor can be mounted to the firewall in 2 different ways. It can be mounted using the existing hardware on your X mount from the rear of the firewall, but I like it this way because it's a lot easier to be able to remove and service the motor. A nice little tip here, if you want to really make sure that these holes stay in good shape and you have a little bit of medium or thin CA, you can put a small drop on the back of the firewall and let it soak around the screws and also the wood. There we go. And finally, for our power pod here, we're going to use the hook and loop Flite Velcro straps. This strap is a really useful tool because rather than only relying on the Velcro, we can do a lot of crazy maneuvers that are high G's and the battery won't be ejected. I always end up putting these in backwards, but I always like to have basically the Velcro and the hook and loop facing outwards. Whoop. Got to open up my little cavity here. We're going to squeeze this through the slot. It's a little bit of a tight fit. I'm going to pull this all the way up. And then on the other side here, little rocking motion's all you need. And we're going to pull this all the way through. There we go. And now when our battery slides through, we can simply slip it over and fasten it down. I'm still going to put either a piece of fuzzy or prickly Velcro on the bottom of our power pod, and this is going to give us the extra insurance that we need to make sure the battery doesn't move or get ejected. I like the way the fuzzy fuselage sounds, so I'm just going to do fuzzy on the fuselage. We'll go ahead and peel it. And we'll stick it in place. Our last step is to install our electronic speed control, or ESC. We can plug this in any way we want, and when we test run the motor, if the motor runs backwards, in other words, if it runs clockwise, we know all we need to do is reverse 2 of the 3 leads, and then that will run the proper direction. Always make sure that you check your motor direction before installing your power pod, and never have your prop on when you do it. 1, 2, and 3. All right, we're now ready to install our power pod into our triplane. I'm gonna go ahead and repeat the exact same process that I did on the power pod with our A-folds. I'm gonna build my little FPV pod and also put that in while I'm putting my power pod in. I already have this weeded out. I'm just gonna go ahead and test fit, and that looks good. Super simple. Up 90, let it dry. Same process on the other side. Test fit. Glue. Up 90 and let it dry. Something that's really special about these slower flying airplanes is they really give you an amazing FPV experience. This is going to really add another dimension, because now not only will you be able to fly FPV if you choose, but you'll also be able to look left, right, up, and down. Now that we're ready to install everything into our airplane, let's also grab our receiver. We'll make our hookups, we'll make sure our motor's running in the right direction, and at that point, we can start getting our final assembly in order. All right, now's the time where we get to bring everything together here. I got my power pod, I got my airframe, and most importantly, I got my receiver and my transmitter here already pre-bound. Now, we have a lot of really great transmitters on our store, and one thing we're gonna do as a different approach here and work through is having a small short video showing you the 5 basic functions of each radio in greater detail. This is gonna keep us from maybe me programming on a Radio Master with ELRS when maybe you're using a Spectrum or FlySky. We want to show you in greater detail how to hook up these airplanes. So what I'm going to do specifically in this video is I'm going to show you how I hook it up for this specific radio. I'm going to tell you important details like proper throws or mixes that you need to have, or door rates and expos. And at that point, if you don't know how to program on your radios or you don't want to read your manual, you can then start searching through our playlist and see if we have that radio listed. Now, the receiver I'm going to be using on this is our Radio Master ER5A. This is pretty cool because it's ELRS. I have a bind phrase in here, and that automatically connects me with my receiver. You're also going to notice that I'm on servo port number 3. Many different receivers like Spectrum have a different mapping than receivers like Radio Master or Edge TX. In this case, this is aileron, elevator, throttle, rudder, aux 1. If you have a 6-channel, it'll oftentimes go to gear or channel 5, and then aux 1. Okay, so now that I have that plugged in, I'm going to go ahead and power on my transmitter first. And all I'm going to do is just make sure that my controls are moving the throttle the right direction. All right. You can see as I run this, I want to see counterclockwise, and that's exactly what I have. If it was reversed, all I simply need to do is take any 2 of these 3 wires and switch them, and we'll have the motor reversed. I can go ahead and leave everything on at this point, and I can start making my connections. In our little power pack here, we have a little Y connector. You can choose to hook up your servos for your ailerons separately, but in this case, I'm gonna go ahead and Y them together. So I'm simply gonna reach inside, I'm gonna grab my 2 leads right here, and I'm gonna plug them in. Whenever you plug them in, make sure that you line up your signal and your ground wires so you don't plug them in backwards. Those are lined up. And these are lined up. Now I can go ahead and take this to my receiver. It's still powered on. I'm going to find servo port number 1, and I'm going to plug it in. All right, both my servos are working. I'm going to go ahead and center out my trims. I actually have this on a shared model here, so there we go. And now I can go ahead and lock down my linkage stoppers. All I need to do to lock down my linkage stoppers is I'm going to hold my hand right where the aileron lines up with the trailing edge. Once I get it started to be tight, I'm going to support it right at the control horn itself, just so I don't hurt anything or break my control horn. And then we'll lock it down. This should be 1, That's perfect, and you'll notice it goes up way higher than it goes down, and that's exactly what we want. I'm gonna go ahead and do the other side here. I'll hold it right here. I'll see if I can do it from the back side here. And I'm gonna go ahead and tighten that down. Once I get it started to be tight, I'll support it right at the control horn itself. Make sure this is good and locked down, because if it comes loose, you're gonna lose control of your airplane. All right, when I push my stick to the right, it goes right. When I push it to the left, it goes left, and that's perfect. Next, we're gonna find the control for my elevator. I'm just gonna wiggle this, look all the way in the back. And it looks like it's this one right here. Elevator is gonna be port number 2. That's actually my rudder. I'll switch that to port number 4. And the final one here is port number 2. There we go. Same thing as before. My trims are in the middle here. I'm gonna go ahead and go back, lock down my linkage stoppers, and at that point I can make sure my throws are going the right direction. All right, all I need to do is simply tighten down my screw. If you have something like a ruler handy, you can always lay that ruler over, make sure it's perfectly flat. Every plane is a little bit different, which means sometimes you're just gonna have to have a little up or down trim. You can either trim it out and then change your settings so everything's neutral, or you can just trim it in flight. All right, that one's locked down. Same process on our elevator. Get it nice and straight. That looks great, and I'll lock that down as well. All right, I'm gonna place this back on the ground. When I pull back on my elevator stick, I should go up, and I do. And when I push my rudder to the right, it goes right. When I push it to the left, it goes left. Now, if any of these move backwards, go ahead and go into your radio settings and reverse that channel. Always make sure that you leave your prop off, because if you have your prop on and you accidentally reverse something like maybe your throttle, it could run away and hurt you. So we don't want to do that. All of our linkage stoppers are locked in. Now what we can do is we can unplug our battery. I'm gonna tape up my wires. I'm gonna go ahead and slide in my power pod and lock it in. So our power pod should slide in nice and neat. I'm gonna go ahead and bring this just so the front of the power pod is flush with the very front of the fuselage here. And the reason I want this pushed a little bit forward here is when we put our cowling on, we have room to put the optional dummy motor on if we wish. Also, this gives us a little extra nose weight to make the plane fly even better. Make sure that your power pod is pushed flat up against the very top plate. And now we can take our barbecue skewers, and one at a time we're gonna go through each indicated hole. We're gonna pop through each surface. It's actually quite thick, so just give it a little twisting motion. There's one. Always make sure that that's sticking up. There's 2. You may have the desire to try to push it all the way through to the other side, but I promise you it will not line up. I'm gonna go ahead and press through the holes on the other side. Again, twisting motion. And then finally, the back one. There we go. Now that we have all 4 of the holes made, I'm just gonna go ahead and pass it straight on through. There we go. I'm only gonna cut this about 1/8 inch on the outside here. Let me grab my cutters. Because I'm only gonna be removing this power pod when I need to service it or do any kind of repairs. If you do plan on being able to swap this from airplane to airplane, this is compatible right now with the Scout XL and also the FT3D XL. And there we go. We're just gonna cut it about 1/4 inch on the heavy side. Now it's up to you if you want to build the outer cowling for this, or if you want to just have more of a sport flyer, you can forego the cowling area around this. It is going to give you a little bit more thrust, a little bit more power, but it is going to rob you a little bit of the scale details. It's completely up to you. Before we move on to the step to show you how to build that cowling that's included in your kit, let's talk about really quick and share with you the throws and the details of the mixing that we're going to need for this airplane to get it to perform the best way possible. If you followed along in this build video and you put the push rods where I told you to, your control throws are going to be incredibly close. That also means you're going to have differential on your ailerons, and that's going to be good. Now, even with the differential on the ailerons, you are going to have a mix between your ailerons and rudder. So in other words, when I move my aileron to the left or the right, I want a 60% mix to my rudder. That means the rudder is going to go 60% where your ailerons go 100%. This plane takes a tremendous amount of rudder, and that's one reason why we don't advise this as your very first airplane. But that being said, once you get flying and get used to flying with rudder, it is an amazing, rewarding experience, and it definitely improves your pilot skills. For the expo, we're going to have 30% expo on all our control throws. So in other words, 100% travel on the ailerons, 30% expo, 100% travel on the elevator, 30% expo, 100% travel on the rudder with 30% expo. If you're using different servos than I have and you're bottoming out, make sure you dial down those throws so they don't bind the rudder against the elevator. We're kind of brushing over the mixing features because every radio is a little different, but again, with our beginner series, we are going to be focusing on different radios, giving you the top features so you know how to program these. If you don't see your radio right now, don't worry, we're working on it. Now we have everything hooked up, let's go ahead and build our optional cowling. We're ready for center of gravity at that point and to take it out and fly it. The two pieces that we're going to need for our optional cowling here is going to be our main cowling piece and our front cowling piece. You're going to notice a score cut right along the edge here. We want to go ahead and remove the foam from that area, and we're also going to peel the facing paper on the rear part so we can mold it together. Just like we've done before, drag our razor blade over and then carefully remove the foam. Very common once in a while to have a little bit of residual foam on there. Just scrape it off with your razor blade and you're good to go. We're also going to remove the facing paper. And we're going to roll the facing paper up. We're not going to pull it like a ripcord. We're just going to keep the pressure going vertically off the foam as we pull it up. And we're going to roll the paper much like we would a burrito. You can see now that the cowling is going to naturally start wanting to curve. To help that, we're going to start from the middle point, and I'm gently going to curve it against the table, just like we did with our turtle deck. You'll notice a little tiny hatch mark right on the very front of our cowling piece. That's going to line up with our cowling itself. So I'm only going to glue one side at a time here. Now that we fit everything and we're happy with it, I'll place my bead of glue right at the corner between the paper and the foam. I'm going to use a table as my friend here. I'm going to line up my little hatch mark and I'm going to curl this around. I'm going to hold this for about 15-20 seconds. Once the glue starts tacking up, I'm going to use the table as my friend to be able to roll the seam out and get a good solid fit. All right, starting to tack up here. And you can see, I can just roll that back and forth. And there we go. Same process on the other side. I'm just going to come behind the former itself. Press some glue in there, and once it opens up enough, I'm going to come all the way around. This one's a little bit easier because I can just simply roll it and hold it. The more that you get to use foam and get used to working it, the easier and more natural this is going to come. You're going to notice that this is a little bit longer, and that's on purpose. This gives us the ability to be able to trim this to a perfect fit on the airplane. Now it's dry, let's bring our airplane in. We'll give this a test fit, we'll trim it into shape, and then we'll glue it down. All right, so we're bringing back our airplane here. I'm just gonna kind of open this up right on the back. Carefully lift it over our barbecue skewers and bring it right down to the top surface. Now we have a couple different options here. You're gonna see that when I split the difference here, that I can sit this flat right on top and that I can move this forward. If you're installing our optional dummy cowl, all you simply need to do is trim that out with a pair of scissors, and that's gonna fit over before we put this on, and just use a couple drops of hot glue to hold it onto the front of the airplane. From that point, you can bring this back up against it, and always make sure that you install your prop loosely to make sure you have the right clearance. Use the cowling and move it in and out before gluing it in place to get the proper fit that you want. Now that everything's lined up good, I can go ahead and use my razor blade, and I'm just gonna go ahead and radius this right down into the fuselage for its final fit. All right, now that I have my cowling trimmed, I'm gonna do one last test here. I'm gonna make sure that my prop clears. I want this to be just far enough in front of the motor, but I don't want it to rub. Our props always have a little bit of friction on them. I just ream it out with a pair of scissors. Just a couple twists is all you need. There we go. And that looks perfect. I'm gonna go ahead and lift this up. And I'm gonna lock, there's a little drop here. I'll put a little drop on the back of the fuselage. I'll put a little drop on the back of the cowling. I'll slide this over. And then press it in place. Once we get our top down, I'm just gonna go ahead and take my hot glue and just put a couple little drops right at the very bottom of the cowling, just so it doesn't flap. And we'll hold that in place. And now that we know that our motor's running in the right direction, that we've tested all of our controls, they're moving in the right direction, I'm gonna go ahead and also install my prop. But one thing I'd strongly recommend that you do, if you're gonna even scratch build this, is don't skimp on the power pack. This 2814 motor is incredibly powerful, it's warranted, and also it gets the proper center of gravity, prop diameter, and power that you need to be able to give you the best performance possible. We put a lot of work to make sure that these power packs are the best quality, but also they can go from plane to plane to plane. So basically, when you're ready to move on from this airframe, you can take all your guts and put it into a different one. Our final step before we get to go out and fly this is to get our center of gravity. I'm gonna go ahead and loosely install my battery. I don't even need to make a connection here. I'm just gonna slide it into place. There we go. Again, I'm not gonna worry about my connection. And my next step here is to get our center of gravity. And to find out where to put my fingers to be able to find the proper center of gravity, I'm gonna locate the two cut dots on the bottom of the middle wing. Once I locate those dots and I hold it in place, what we should see is either level or slightly nose down. Now, if for some reason you're putting a lot of paint, or maybe you're putting an FPV gear or a camera on the back, you may notice it's a little tail heavy. Make sure you add just a little bit extra weight through either a bigger battery or through some lead weights on the side cheeks of your front cowling to get it nose down. We put a lot of time to make sure that the electronics that we sell make this plane balance perfectly without any extra weight needing to be added. And one thing to keep in mind, if you're gonna install something like the optional FPV pod in the back, you may need to shift your battery just a little bit more forward than what you think, or confirm that your center of gravity has not moved. Nice thing about our pan tilt system is it's incredibly light. And to install our pan tilt system, all we need to do is take the piece of foam that we built, glue in our 3D printed receiver, and then glue that into the fuselage. Once that's glued into the fuselage, we can take our pan tilt system, we feed our wires through. We can have this be standalone, where basically we just angle it and we fly in a fixed position, or we can hook this up to a larger receiver and be able to use head tracking and many other cool features to look left, right, up, and down. This is simply gonna notch in and press down. At this point, we can look left, right, up, down, and get an amazing pilot's perspective. All right, friends, the exciting part's come. We are ready to test fly our Fokker triplane and put it up in the air for the very first time. If this is the first time made in your very own airplane, we have a really great video called 6 Quick Tips for a Successful First Flight. I'd strongly recommend that you watch that video. It kind of goes over a lot of the basics we just covered. It gives you the best chance for a successful flight. I'm gonna go ahead and meet you out in the field. We're gonna put it in the air and see how it goes. All right, friends, we are ready to take flight here. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna make sure we're flying on a calm day, especially if you're a beginner pilot. Our center of gravity is good, and there's virtually no wind, so we can kind of take off almost any direction we want. It's coming a little bit out this way, so I'm gonna take it off towards the bridge right here. Notice I'm not flying on the main runway. This plane is so incredibly slow. You can even fly it in a large indoor arena, like an indoor football field. So I'm gonna go ahead and check my controls one last time, put it in the wind, and we'll see how it does. Up, down, right, left, and of course our throttle. Let's go ahead and take it up in the air. A little back pressure on the elevator, let the tail rise up. Oh my goodness. That is virtually hands off, friends. Now, although this is a intermediate airplane, it doesn't mean it's an aggressive airplane. The only reason I classified this as intermediate is because you do have to actively fly the rudder. It's not bank and yank. I'm flying right now at half throttle. A nice little trick here is when you enter a bank, you're gonna enter the bank and then you're gonna continue with rudder as you center your aileron stick. Let's just do a roll real quick. Whee! Simple barrel roll. Wing over. And let's do a loop. And that's why we have the strap for the battery. Good way to check center of gravity is to put it upside down. A little bit of forward pressure is all you need. And once we're comfortable with that, we can bring it on lower and lower. Look at that. You're gonna be carrying more throttle when you're upside down, about 3/4. And I'm just gonna avoid those power lines. There we go. You can see that this thing just turns on a dime. And one thing, even though this is a shorter coupled airplane, it has the best ground handling between that and the Jenny. I love doing long touch and goes. I'm just gonna tuck it right around here and we're gonna land it just like that. Whenever you're taxiing, you pull back on the elevator and your rudder, and even though it has a tail skid, it steers as easy as a car. Friends, I want to thank you for being part of the Flight Test family. Thank you for taking time to build with me and fly with me. One thing we're really excited to see in the near future is many of these being built along with the FT-XL Jennies and the XL Scouts, and all flying together. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe bell because my next project for an XL size warbird is going to be the SE5. We'll see you next time. One thing you can do if you want to remove the tackiness, just lick the tip of your finger and go right along that glue edge. The glue's already dry now.